I guess I don't remember much about Grandpa Bergquist. He died when I was 14. But the one thing I remember was he was a carpenter. And in Sweden, before they came here, he had a shop above the house where they lived. And my Aunt Esther was born there in Sweden. And when they were getting ready to come here, she must have been around 3. Grandpa, before then, had cut his hand doing his work. It kind of cut in there and cut off part of his thumb. And this other part was kind of didn't move as good. And there was no hair growing there, so he really wiped it out. And they were afraid they wouldn't be able to get into the United States if he had anything wrong with him. So he carried my Aunt Esther over and hid his hand under the baby there so they could get in. And I don't know, they couldn't have objected to him. He worked as hard as he could all his life. He worked in Bayport, Minnesota for the Anderson Window Company when they first started out. He made these chairs, he made lots of different things that we still have in our house. But he died when I was fairly young. And he was a very quiet man. He didn't talk much, but we'd go up and hang around, and I always want to look at his thumb like it was the most freak show that there was imaginable. He would let us look, and we'd be poking around, and catch us with it all the time, and we'd just wait for that grandpa catch. It was funny. He was strong with it, this little thing, but we had a good time with him. He was a nice guy. Everybody liked Ed, Grandpa Bergquist. But Eleanor, I remember when he died, she was coming over and we were going to go somewhere, and I said, I can't go, my grandpa died. And my mother and Aunt Esther were crying, and they went to Bayport. It was sad, sad. But I guess I was talking about my friend Eleanor, too, when we last signed off, and our fights and our makeups and all this. One time we got it in our heads we wanted to play in the middle of the street. And we took all our dolls and doll beds and stuff and set it up in the middle of the street in front of our house. And, of course, cars came. I guess that was part of the fun. But when my mother saw what we were doing, it ended quickly. Anyhow, we had a lot of good times. She moved away, then she moved back a ways down, but we sort of got away from one another like all friends do. I don't know. I don't have a lot of memory of my middle childhood, just riding bikes and being half scared of the boys in the neighborhood. They were rough. It wasn't the best neighborhood in the world. Lots of kids, but wild. I know that one kid across the street named Tiny, they called him Tiny Garcia because he was a small, skinny guy. He ran over me with his 2-wheel bike. I had fallen down and he ran right over me. And the girl who lived next door, they called her Friendly Eyes because her eyes looked at each other all the time. So she was known as Friendly Eyes. I didn't call her that. But suddenly, I was over at the Garcia house. She came over, walked up to me, and slapped my face. And I was so, what'd I do? I ran home crying. I didn't play with Friendly Eyes. Otherwise, the kids in the neighborhood were mostly boys. And they were rough. And Eleanor's brother Richard started a fire next door to us in the empty lot that could have spread easily to our wooden fence and house. And my dad was out yelling and getting the hose out. And Richard was swatting at it and sweating. And he ended up in reform school and in prison. Not too great of a guy. My sister used to trade comic books with him out of his bedroom window because he was always locked in his room. Maybe that's why he was so mean. He had picked off the plaster on the walls and done everything because he had nothing to do, but he'd lower a rope, she'd tie her comic books on it, and he'd raise it up, and then he'd send some down, and so she kept him happy, I guess. But it was a good childhood.